Hello, my name is Lilly Winfree, and I'm excited to present at Virtual SciPy. I want to thank the conference organizers for making this conference happen. And today I'll be telling you about frictionless data for reproducible biology. I work for the Open Knowledge Foundation, and my background is in neuroscience research. And today I'll be telling you about the Frictionless Data Project and how we're working with biologists to try and help make their research data workflows more reproducible. And if this was a live talk, at this point, I would ask my audience members to raise their hands if they're familiar with the reproducibility crisis, but I don't have an audience unless you count my dogs. So we'll just skip the audience participation part and go right in to discuss the reproducibility crisis in research. This is a recent example of the reproducibility problem in science, where earlier this year, Dr. Kate Laskowski had to retract a paper because the underlying raw data was no longer trusted. And this happened because her and her colleagues were trying to repeat analysis on that data and either couldn't figure out how the original analysis happened, or when they repeated the analysis, they got different results. And this is a horror story. No researcher ever wants this to happen. But this is not the only case of this. Why does this happen with research? Well, there are a few reasons. For instance, if data is not openly or completely published, or if the analysis methods for analyzing that data are not openly or completely published, that can also lead to irreproducibility. So you might notice that these things I talked about are data management problems. So I like to think that science has a reproducibility problem, but I like to call it a data management problem. So today we'll talk a lot about data management in science and how the Frictionless Data program can help scientists better manage their data. So I work for the Open Knowledge Foundation, which is a nonprofit, and we are aiming to create a fair, free, and open future for all, where information is publicly available and where we are building communities and tools and teaching the public how to use that publicly available information to impact positive social change. Within the Open Knowledge Foundation, I work on the Frictionless Data Project, and I've said frictionless data a lot in the past few minutes. So what are some frictions in data that we're trying to remove? Frictions in data are things that make it difficult to use data. They can be questions like, what does this column name mean? How was the analysis done? Who created the data? And things like checking the data quality. These are all important things that you need to know about data before you can use the data easily. And these frictions are the inspiration for the Frictionless Data Project, which is an open source project. At its core, it is specifications for data and metadata interoperability, and a collection of open source software libraries, including many Python libraries, a range of best practices for data management, and importantly, it's platform agnostic, which means that it's very interoperable. Frictionless Data, the open source project, is overseen by my team at the Open Knowledge Foundation and also by a team at Datopian, our sister organization. And within Open Knowledge Foundation, we have funding to work specifically with researchers to ask, how can researchers best use frictionless data? We call that project the Frictionless Data for Reproducible Research Project, and we're focused on removing the friction in research data to go from data to insight faster. This is my team within Open Knowledge Foundation that works on this project. Again, this is open source and it's very community focused. And by that, I mean that we really rely on our community members to give us feedback about the project, to use our tools, to open issues if they have issues, and also to contribute if they want. And so here's a link to our GitHub repository where you can check out all of our code. This project is funded by the Sloan Foundation, and we have three main ways that we collaborate with researchers. First, we have fellows, where we work with early career researchers to teach them about open science and data management practices, and also how to use frictionless data within their research. We have a tool fund where we work with developers to develop novel tooling for open science built upon the open frictionless data code. And then we have pilots where we work in a hands-on fashion with a group of researchers to try and help solve a research data workflow issue that they have. So today I'll be telling you about the technical background of frictionless data by highlighting 3 different case studies in biology. 2 of the case studies will be pilots, and 1 is from the Fellows program. Here's a little outline of what we're going to talk about today, and I'll explain all of this in more detail when we get to them. But first, we will start by looking at frictionless data packages and pipelines, and we will be looking at that with the BCO-DMO group, which is oceanography data management. And then we'll move on to Goodtables and table schema, and we'll be looking at that with Lilly Zhao, who is a fellow and a graduate student. And then we'll be looking at frictionless specifications with our new pilot with Dr. Roca Serra, and that will be looking at rows data. So let's dive into BCO-DMO. So first, we're going to talk about our data packages and pipelines, and we'll be using the create.frictionlessdata.io, which is a web browser tool, which anyone can use. It's user-friendly and requires no programming knowledge. And then we will also be hitting on 2 different Python libraries, data package pipelines and data package Python. BCO-DMO is the Biological and Chemical Oceanography Data Management Office, and they actually have a talk at SciPy as well, so I encourage you to check that out. And BCO-DMO receives messy data about the ocean. They receive data about ocean salinity or jellyfish biology and all sorts of formats. And then they have data managers that clean that data and then host the data so other people can use it. But this cleaning and hosting was an area that they were looking for help with. And so that's where we started our pilot collaboration, where we started to work with the BCO-DMO data managers to help them clean their data using frictionless data. And importantly, we were focusing on how do we make this data cleaning process reproducible so that other people first understand what happened to the data and can reproduce that process if they want. So to do this, we worked with DataPackages. And DataPackages are one of the foundations of frictionless data. It is a specification, and the idea here is that you're packaging or wrapping your data, for instance, a CSV file, with its associated metadata and optionally a schema. And the data package is a really useful format, and I will tell you more about that with these examples from BCO-DMO data. This is a data set that you can download from BCO-DMO, and first looking at it, you're like, I don't really know what this means. Temp, probably temperature, but what are the degrees? What's the unit? I don't know what cond is. So this is raw data without any metadata, and it's not innately useful. So it's really important to have metadata, and here's the metadata associated with this data. So we see temp, it's degrees Celsius. Cond means conductivity and also has a unit. And now that we have this metadata, this data is much more useful. And BCO-DMO receives data that has a lot of really rich metadata that the data managers wanted to make sure that they were keeping and hosting so that other people could use that information. And so in the data package, you are able to package this raw data with its metadata in a machine-readable format. As you can see, this is somewhat machine-readable, but oftentimes BCO-DMO receives metadata in, like a Word document or embedded within an Excel file, and it's not already innately machine-readable and therefore not super reproducible or reusable by others. So the first thing we did is worked on putting this into a more reusable format. And I'm going to show you one way you can do that with frictionless tools. And first, we're going to use the create.frictionlessdata.io, which is a browser tool called Data Package Creator. And again, this is a user-friendly tool, no programming required. But we also have it in a Python library version where you can do even more with this concept. So this is a screenshot of the browser tool. Here you can see that we loaded in a raw data file. And then with the tool, once you load in the raw data, the tool automatically pulls out the associated metadata, and it writes that metadata in JSON format. And JSON is a machine readable format, so now this metadata is much more reusable. It's also human editable in the browser tool. So for instance, you could go in and add a description here to say lat means latitude. You can also change the data type if the auto-populated data type happened to be incorrect. And using both the tool and the Python library, you can then download these data packages. So again, that is the raw data with its associated metadata. You can also add in additional metadata here, such as license type or authors. So why would you want to package your data? Packaged data is more useful data. I like to use a Lego analogy here to describe this, where you can imagine a data package being a Lego piece. And one of my favorite things about Legos is that they're very interoperable. If you take pieces of Lego from different packages, they automatically work together. And that's because they're a standard size. It's the same idea with the data package. When you package this data and its metadata, you make it more usable by making it more standard. And then you can plug and play with different tools or different software. Packaged data is also easier to publish. For instance, with BCO-DMO, one of the things we did was package this data and metadata into data packages that were then able to be hosted by BCO-DMO for other people to download and use. You can also publish packaged data at different repositories, such as Zenodo. So within BCO-DMO, the way that we went about this process was to create a new pipeline with their data managers, and we used the Frictionless data package pipelines to do this. And this is a Python framework that I've linked below. It's for declarative processing of tabular data. Innately, it has standardized data processing steps like joins and finds. But you can also write custom processors, which is really useful for BCO-DMO data managers because there are certain things that they do all the time to their data sets to clean them, like take unstandard date formats and turn them into standard date formats. The pipelines are defined in a pipeline spec YAML file, and this is key. This is a human-readable file that specifies all of the processor steps and all of the execution parameters. So this tells us every step that was done in that data cleaning pipeline, and this is really important for reproducibility. The output of the data package pipeline is a single data package. So to sum up this use case, with BCO-DMO, we worked with them to start with messy data and then created a data package pipeline that the managers were able to use to clean this messy data. And that generates a pipeline spec file that tells us everything that happened to that data, the data package, which includes the metadata describing the data, and the nice clean data that can then be hosted and used by other people. And I want to mention these slides are from Amber York of BCO-DMO. They're really interesting research, and I encourage you to check out their other talk. All right, so that was a brief introduction to data packages and pipelines. And now we're going to move on to talk about Goodtables and table schema. And to do that, I'm going to introduce you to Lilly Zhao, who was one of our fellows and who does research on coral reef ecology and also the people that live around these coral reefs. So the data I'm going to show you from her is interview data from those residents. And if anybody's worked with interview data before, you know it can be particularly messy. So we're going to talk about schemas and how you can use a schema to validate your data with our tool, Goodtables. Here's the links here. Goodtables is our browser tool. Again, user-friendly, no programming needed. And then we have Goodtables Python library and table schema Python library we'll talk about. And briefly, the definition of a schema, you can think of it like a description of your data set. It describes things like what types of data are in specific columns or how big the data set is. So we will do a data validation tell using Lilly's data. And here I have a very small subset of her interview data. And on the left side, we have a small subset of the schema that describes this data set. And in this case, Lilly created this schema using the data package creator browser tool I just showed you. But we also have this table schema Python library I've linked below where you can create and work with schemas as well. I've circled this column here for age range to show you that the data type, it has words and numbers, so it should be a string. But over here in the schema, we see that it actually is listed as a type number. So this is an error, and I'm going to show you how we can use frictionless data tools called Goodtables to validate this data. So this is Goodtables, the browser tool, and here you can insert your raw data and optionally a schema to validate your data, which is what we've done here looking at Lilly's data that I just showed you. And we get an error, which is what we expected because we know that it should have been string and not number. And that's what Goodtables tells us. Here's our error message. The value under 35 in row 2 and column 5 is not type number. So we know the exact problem with our data and we know where to find it, so we can go in and fix it. And this is a fairly simple example to give you a brief introduction to Goodtables and schemas, but one of my favorite illustrative horror stories about why you should use a schema comes from Excel and genetics data, where Excel will infamously change certain gene names to dates. For example, the gene DEC7, Excel will change to December 7th, and it does this silently. So it corrupts your data and it doesn't tell you. And there were actually several research papers that had to be retracted because this had happened with Excel and the researchers didn't realize it. And then their analysis was incorrect because of this Excel error. But if they had had a schema that said column A should be strings and not dates, and then they used it with, say, Goodtables to validate, Goodtables would have caught that error and told them where the error was, and they would have been able to quickly fix it. We also have a version of Goodtables for continuous data validation where it's integrated with GitHub. So if you have your data hosted on GitHub, every time you make changes to your data and push those changes, Goodtables will run and validate your data and let you know if there are any new errors in that data. All right. So now I'm going to move on to our final use case where we will be talking about frictionless specifications. And to talk about this, I'm going to introduce you to some work that Dr. Rocha Serra and his team did looking at rose data from the rose genome. So the rose genome was recently published openly, which is amazing. And Dr. Serra's team wanted to see if they could make this data more fair, and they did this with frictionless data. FAIR is an acronym that stands for Findable, Accessible, Interoperable, and Reusable, and it's part of data best practices. So this is actually a screenshot of the supplementary data from this paper. And you can see automatically that it's not super machine readable. There's a ton of white space. It's formatted for humans to read. So for instance, there's the protocol information at the top, and ideally we would have this included in the metadata in a machine readable format. And then also we have this table of actual data here. And again, there's a lot of blank spaces. It's formatted for humans. And so Phil and his team saw this data and decided to make it more fair by implementing frictionless data. And briefly, what they did was they made it more findable and accessible by taking it out of Excel and putting it into DataPackages and then hosting those data packages on Zenodo so other people could use them. They also made it more interoperable and reusable by extending frictionless specifications, the table schema, to better describe the metadata. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. Here's an example where they were extending the table schema. And this is data from the rows data showing you the chemical compounds that make up the scent of a rose. So this is the column with the chemical name. And then here, this column is the standard name of that chemical. And so this is from an ontology. It's from the EDM ontology. And we know that because Phil and his team added that information to the metadata in the schema here, which is what I've highlighted. And it's really useful to have this information because ontologies are innately made for interoperability. And it's standard, so now other people know this information and they can also reuse this data. I also want to highlight the links here. Phil and his team have created some notebooks where you can go ahead and play around with this data too if you're interested in it. Another project that we're working with Phil and the team on right now, it's a new project, is to extend table schema with the Stato ontology, which is a statistics ontology. And for example, here we have name, sample mean, title, mean, description, and then the RDF type, which again is the ontology term from Stato. And this is useful because sometimes researchers do not describe these statistics that they use when they analyze their data, or if they do say a test, they don't describe it in enough detail for others to reproduce that work or that analysis. So if you're able to add in a link to a standard statistical test, then other researchers can repeat that analysis in a more reproducible way. So that's our goal with this project. And again, this is brand new work, so stay tuned for that. But to summarize the work that Phil and his team did with DataPackages and with making their rows data more fair by using frictionless data, here is a screenshot of their Zenodo page where they have their paper showing the research that they did and also the data packages of this data, and there's a DOI to it. So in summary, they use frictionless data to make this data more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And Phil recently gave a talk on this that goes into a lot more detail than I did, and that's right here. If you're interested, I encourage you to check out that video. All right, I know that I just gave you a super brief and intensive overview of frictionless data in our tooling. And so if you have questions or if you want to try it yourself, I encourage you to check out our guide. Our guide is our documentation, and this is an in-progress document. So we are currently trying to make our docs better. So if you use our documentation, please give us feedback. If you have feedback, it's super valuable to us. And I want to end with some links where you can learn more and stay in contact with us. Again, here's our GitHub repository where all of our code is open. Our Discord, which is chat for our community. YouTube, where we have some more video tutorials. And if you're on Twitter, please follow us on Twitter. And I encourage you all to join our community. And I'm really looking forward to answering your questions in the chat. So thank you so much.